Love that McDonald's coffee. Welcome back. It's been a while since I've done one of these YouTube lessons with you, but I am ready to do several more. Glad you're here for this lesson on the presidency of John Adams from 1797 to 1801. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope that you are staying home. I know that we have been quarantined for several weeks. Don't get impatient. Don't start thinking that it's okay to go out in large groups. You really do need to stay home. Limit your contact with people outside of your home. If you do interact with people, make sure you're practicing safe social distancing. Do not be going into stores without masks or gloves. Make sure you're being safe. All right, there's no reason to put yourself or your family at risk. All right, so with that said, let's begin. As I mentioned, we are going to be learning about the presidency of John Adams. You can go ahead and learn more about that here in your MyWorld Interactive textbook on pages 191 to 200. That's topic 3, lesson 3. Right there. See? Right there. As I mentioned, John Adams was the second president of the United States, elected in 1796. He was the first person to be elected after the first president, obviously, George Washington. Unfortunately for John Adams, when he took the presidency in 1797, our country was already facing conflict with another nation. No, not England, but France. Remember that France had been our ally in the Revolutionary War. And as you recall, one of the differences between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans was support for either England with the Federalists or support for France amongst the Democratic Republicans. That's going to come into play during the presidency of John Adams. So in the British West Indies, French ships were attacking American ships, which obviously escalated tensions between the United States and France. President Adams, not wanting to rush into war, decided that he would send diplomats to Paris, France, in order to negotiate a peace agreement or treaty with France. However, once our diplomats arrived in France, they were shocked to discover that they would not be meeting with the French foreign minister, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. Instead, they met with 3 agents who basically said, we'll only negotiate with you if you give him $250,000 and provide a $10 million loan to the nation of France. Obviously, the Americans were outraged, and one of them said, not a sixpence. In other words, we're not going to give you a dime. So the diplomats returned home without a peace agreement reached with France. They quickly informed President Adams of what happened. Now, President Adams went to Congress and let them know what happened. When he spoke of the affair, he referred to those French agents as X, Y, and Z, those 3 anonymous, not to be named French agents who demanded a bribe from the Americans before they would engage in this peace agreement. The American people were outraged, and one of the things that was commonly heard was millions for defense, but not a cent for tribute. In other words, we'll pay a lot of money to go to war with France, but we're not going to pay one single penny, 1 cent on a tribute or a bribe to reach a peace settlement with France. Now, the Federalist Party took full advantage of the Americans' outrage. One, the Federalist Party was hoping that there would be war because increased military activity would lead to more federal power, which is what the Federalist Party wanted. And they also wanted to take advantage of the American people's outrage for their own political benefit, right? They wanted to be the most popular, the most beloved party amongst the American people. So John Adams was a Federalist, so he had to push back against people like Alexander Hamilton within his own Federalist Party to keep them from pushing the country into war. John Adams prepared for war, right? You have to pay for military. There was an increase in taxes because he built up the Navy with more fast moving ships loaded with guns in order to protect or to potentially go to war against French ships. But Adams was not interested in war. He was interested in peace. He learned the lesson from President Washington: do not get involved in foreign affairs. He sent more diplomats back to France to see if they could reach a peace agreement. Now, those American diplomats met a French diplomat at the time by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. You'll learn more about him later. Napoleon was more interested in building up power for France, and he was looking forward to more wars with European nations. So he didn't want to be bothered by the Americans. He didn't really see us as a threat, in other words. So he said, fine, I'll sign the peace agreement with you. I don't really care. I'm going to focus on war with Europe. So he quickly signed the agreement, and the Americans went back on their merry way, and the whole XYZ conflict with France came to a peaceful resolution. The second major controversy of President Adams' administration were the Alien and Sedition Acts, a series of acts intended to protect the Federalist Party politically, but also to protect the government from criticism. So the Alien Act, what it basically did was allow the president, John Adams, to expel any immigrant, any foreigner who was maybe causing problems in the United States. That would be like today if President Trump just had any power at all to kick out immigrants that he didn't like or immigrants he thought were causing problems, right? So that was not a popular act that was passed. The other thing that the Alien Acts did was make it harder for immigrants to become citizens. They had to wait 14 years before they could become citizens and have the power to, or have the right to vote. This was seen as a move to protect the Federalist Party because back then a lot of immigrants supported the Democratic Republican Party and they supported Jefferson. So this was seen as a move to delay those immigrants from voting and delay support for that other party. The Sedition Acts were a series of acts intended to keep people from exercising the full range of their freedom of speech rights, especially speech that could be seen as antagonizing the government, attacking the government, being super critical of the government, or speech that encouraged rebellion or uprising. So under this law, the government could arrest you, put you in jail, give you a fine. And so several people who were editors for newspapers, owned newspapers, even some members of Congress were punished. They were basically thrown in jail or given fines for exercising their First Amendment and giving their opinions. In your book on page 193, you can see the blue text there. It says, "They have brought into the lower house a sedition bill, which undertakes to make printing certain matters criminal. Indeed, this bill and the Alien Bill both are so against the Constitution as to show they mean to pay no respect to it." That was written by Thomas Jefferson, 1798. So Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were both strong critics of the Alien and Sedition Acts, but they actually went too far in their criticism because Thomas Jefferson and James Madison came up with an idea called nullification. They proposed the concept that if states didn't like what the federal government was doing, if they didn't like something like the Alien and Sedition Acts, for example, states could choose to nullify or to cancel or ignore federal laws. The two states that followed Madison and Jefferson's advice were Kentucky and Virginia. Now, both Jefferson and Madison were Virginians. They came up with a series of resolutions which basically said if a state determines that a federal law is unconstitutional, they don't have to follow it. Here's the text. Resolved that the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to the general government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, in other words, powers that aren't specified in the Constitution, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. So in other words, according to Thomas Jefferson, if you don't like what the federal government is saying, if you don't like what law they're passing, then it has no force. It doesn't have any authority. You can just ignore it. That's what they mean by nullification, right? It's the remedy, according to Jefferson, that if you don't like something, don't follow it. Now, obviously, that goes too far. That actually goes to the extent of saying that the federal government has no power. Ultimately, that states retain all the power. That's not the way a federalist system works. And that will be something that comes into play later, especially as we move towards the Civil War. So keep that in mind. So as we wrap this part of our lesson up, let's turn to the election of 1800. Now, the Federalists were not happy with John Adams. They ended up nominating him to be their candidate in the 1800 election, but they weren't really happy with him. He didn't pursue war with France as they had hoped. But the public was also turning against the Federalists because of the Alien and Sedition Acts. They weren't happy that they had to pay taxes to prepare for a war that never happened. And so the public voted for the Democratic Republican Party. That's the party that won the most popular votes. But remember from our last lesson, presidents aren't chosen by popular vote. They're determined by the Electoral College, right? You can go back to the last lesson to learn more about that. But in the Electoral College, Thomas Jefferson actually tied with Aaron Burr. They both won 73 electoral votes, which meant there was a tie. According to the Constitution, when there is a tie in the Electoral College, the House of Representatives has to break the tie. After 4 days and 36 votes, the House of Representatives elected Thomas Jefferson. Now, remember, going back to the 3/5 compromise, in the House of Representatives, they actually had more representation in southern states like Virginia because they were allowed to count 3/5 of their slave population as part of their total population, which meant that those southern states with a lot of slaves inflated their number of representatives in the House. So that's why many people consider Thomas Jefferson to have been elected due to the fact of slavery and due to the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution. Because without allowing for 3/5 of the slave population to be counted, the northern states would have had more votes in the House of Representatives, and they more than likely would have elected John Adams. But that's how it worked out because of slavery, the evil of slavery, and the 3/5 compromise. So with the election of 1800 complete, with Thomas Jefferson now as president and Aaron Burr as the vice president, the administration of John Adams came to a close. He only served for one term, and he was very bitter about that. But this also signaled the end of the Federalist power in government. They were unpopular with the public. The Democratic Republicans were more popular. They were growing in power. But also in 1804, the leader of the Federalist Party, Alexander Hamilton, was shot and killed by Aaron Burr, the vice president. And with the death of Alexander Hamilton, that really was the death of the Federalist Party. So as we wrap up here, I think it's important to just note that this was an important moment in American history because you had the transfer of power from one party, the Federalists, to another party, the Democratic Republicans. And this transfer of power was done peacefully. There wasn't war, there wasn't conflict, aside from Aaron Burr shooting and killing Alexander Hamilton. It was a peaceful transfer of power. So that's important to remember. Anyway, so with that, that's the lesson. Stay tuned. The next lesson will be on the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. Keep reading your books. Keep checking your Google Classroom. Keep checking your Gmail. I'm posting things on Flipgrid. I'll be doing more Edpuzzles. You know, school's not over yet. We're on a vacation. We still have several months to go until summer vacation. And then when you come back after summer vacation, you will be in the 9th grade. And I hope you come back to visit me because I'm not going to be able to see you in person for the rest of the school year. So keep in touch, be safe, be healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Tighten up. No, still not good. I don't know how to end this. I'm so bad at this.